This is the Cyber Brisket Podcast, serving up what's hot in IT so your business doesn't get cooked.
Today's guest is John Gibson, a retired service-connected disabled U.S. Navy veteran, Christian, husband, father, and founder and CEO of Just Right IT. John launched Just Right back in 1995 while still on active duty, and he brings decades of real-world experience at the intersection of IT and high security operations. Now based in Tampa, his team takes a cybersecurity first approach to becoming your IT department for small and mid-sized businesses, with a focus on fast, reliable support whenever you need it. John Gibson, welcome to the Cyber Brisket Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
I've known you a lot of years, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation because there's so much that for as long as I've known you, there's a lot that I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to help rectify that. One of the things I think not a lot of guys know is that I am retired Navy, and I retired in October of 1997. So that seems like a very long time ago, close to 30 years. I mean, next year is going to be my 30th year out of service. So I'm well past that point of having more years out than I had in. I did retire early because of a program that was offered, and it was one of those things where it just made sense to do so. And as you mentioned, I started Just Right back in '95 while I was still on active duty, so it gave me a chance to not just casually stroll into a job or a business. I was sprinting by the time I actually was discharged, so I had no problem with, that was the glory days of Windows 95. Remember how they said that it would be plug and play? And it was more like plug and pray, right? Because nothing,
Sure.
you had to have a technician just to set up a sound card, or modems were the thing back then. You actually used dial-up in those days. So even getting a modem work, those were really tricky. HP printers, especially the office jets, they were a nightmare. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's come a long way since then.
the world looked a lot different back then. And that actually dovetails into my first question. So let's kick off the interview here. You founded your business back in 1995 while you were still on active duty. What principles from that era and from high security environments most shaped how you think about protecting small businesses today?
Well, ever since I joined the Navy in 1980, I had a security clearance because I was exposed to secret and top secret material. So security was always top of mind. So that's one of the things I tell people. I have over 45 years experience with security. And it's true because we had to have constantly changing, like not passwords. We did have some passwords, but like combinations to safes and things like that, access constantly changing and constant monitoring and constant, I don't want to say that we were under a microscope, but we were constantly scrutinized. So security was always very top of mind for me. And at that point where I started Just Right in '95, I was at a float training group where we readied our ships, our crews, to go out on deployment. And in '95, there were definitely things going on. We were still, in the Cold War with Russia at that time. We were constantly doing the cat and mouse thing with them, and so there was always sensitive information that I was put in charge of. And one of the other things I had the opportunity to do is, which got me very interested in business, as well. I was at a float training group. They asked me to get involved with total quality leadership and to teach that to the command. And what TQL is, total quality leadership, is the same thing that was out in the civilian world. They called total quality management, which is now known as Six Sigma. And so I was teaching that to the officers and crew members, all the leaders of a float training group, as part of one of my collateral duties. And that's another thing that you do typically when you're in the military. You have lots of collateral duties. And that was one of mine, but it helped me get into that mindset of running a business. So I had the security background plus a method for running business. Continual process improvement is right at the heart of TQL and Six Sigma, and documenting every single process you have, taking all those processes and making systems out of them, and taking those systems, making sure you're continually improving on them, and keeping things like documentation up to date as you go along, and following those documented processes and procedures each and every time you do something, and improving on them each and every time you do something, so that it's always getting better. So I felt that was a great introduction to not only retiring from the Navy, but starting a business. I was on fire to do something. I wanted to get out and do it, and I was very successful very quickly. I mean, I I retired in October of '97. June, I had 4 months of we called it. I had leave and transition leave, which is basically vacation time that I had built up in my books, but the transition time was something they gave us. By the time from June to October, I had already tripled my income from the Navy in that few short months by the time I hit the end of the year. So in 6 months, I tripled my income, and that gave me the motivation and belief in myself that I could do this. So, and it was never a problem after that.
Yeah, it's pretty clear, having known you as long as I've known you, and as much as I know you, to see why you've been successful over this time. And for those of us that don't know, would you mind telling me what a float training group is?
A float training group is a command that's basically in charge of readying our ships and naval personnel for deployment. And what we did, our job was to make sure those ships were aware of where they were going as far as what the threats were, or potential threats were. It was like intelligence on the countries and what their capabilities were, and how to recognize them. A big part of what I did, I ran a training division for the anti-submarine warfare side of things, and that was my specialization, was anti-submarine warfare. And that meant knowing all the sensors, all the weapons, all the ranges of those weapons, all the ranges of those sensors, plus the
Wow.
propulsion systems and everything else. And we would teach our crews how to recognize and detect those types of ships and submarines that were out there. So we knew how, what the threat was, what type of, even down to what type of weapon do we use to counter that, or what type of systems do we use to go up against that particular potential threat. So it was a lot about wargaming as well. We always practiced the way we would fight, and we had components of a float training group that would go on the ships with these individual, or with these commands up these ships and ships personnel, and go through what they learned in the classroom, so that they had application experience as well as just head knowledge.
Yeah, so as you were talking there, my mind was drawing a bunch of parallels between what you were doing there in terms of your anti-submarine warfare and the types of security or that exist in the cyber realm.
Yeah, there's definitely parallels to things I've been doing since 1980 anyway, to, what we face every single day now, and the need, they say in the Navy, loose lips sink ships,
Sure.
same kind of thing. We always had an operational security mindset. We always had you know, beware of your surroundings. I mean, my wife's always amazed at how I'll see things that she wouldn't normally see in other people around me. I said, well, didn't you notice that over there? Yeah. In other words, you're kind of like trained to look for the things that are typically going to be missed by others that are not trained, I guess you could say, to notice certain things. And in cyber warfare, that's certainly the case. We have a wide array of threats that are out there, and staying on top of that. That's one of the reasons why I love what I do. Is like it's never the same. I tell people all the time, I could never work on a factory line doing the same thing over and over again, because I would go out of my mind. I'm the type that needs constant, different types of things, different challenges all the time. I'm not saying that, there's anything wrong with working in a factory. It's just that that type of thing I would not do well at. So, it's like I need the challenges and I love solving problems, issues. So,
All right, let's lean into this cybersecurity thread and tie that back to business. So
sure.
when you say cybersecurity first, what does that actually mean in practice for 10 to 100 person businesses? If you could design a minimum viable security stack that doesn't crush productivity, what are the non-negotiables?
Okay, well, that's a lot of questions in one. Cybersecurity first means that first and foremost, we take cybersecurity literally very seriously, and we see that as the biggest threat, the biggest risk to all of our clients and potential clients. So, leading with cybersecurity by having as secure as possible of a offering for our clients to really do the best job possible at if not preventing the attacks, because we can't say we can prevent all attacks, but if we make our clients less viable by making their security so good that the hackers are going to come across it and realize, oh, they've got this in place. We're not going to be able to get through that quickly. So let's just move on to the next one because there's so many easy targets out there. And that's really, really the case is that there's a lot of easy targets out there. And a lot of these attacks are not even originating as a computer attack first, or a lot of the like 77% of the successful attacks. And what I mean by successful, the attacks that led to a breach or incident originated as a phishing email. So that's the majority of them, certainly. That other 23% were things like sending a text message to initiate, and then somebody gets that text message. I just saw something yesterday where somebody got a text message from their bank and they decided to call the number that was on their text message instead of looking up their bank or going to their branch and saying, "Hey, did you guys really send this to me?" They called that number and then got reeled in. It was another type of phishing. They call it, actually, I guess it's smishing in that case, since it's SMS texting type of messages. But there's all kinds of little funny names for these things out there right now. But by providing what I consider to be the best in class security solutions, I'm at least doing what I can to keep my clients as safe as possible. And if I can't stop the attack, then we want to be able to detect it and then respond to it as quick as possible, and if necessary, remediate it. And that's one of the things I frequently do a presentation that I learned from a guy by the name of David Stelzo. He calls it the house in the cloud
Mm,
because security works the same regardless of what type of security you're talking about. There's certain elements of security that are essential to have a security program. And the three that most everybody has control over are protection, detection, and response. And we typically only, when I say we, businesses typically only focus on that first one, protection. And Gartner Research Group did a study of this a few years ago where they actually proved that to be true. They found that, and this was interviewing thousands of small and medium and enterprise businesses across the United States. They basically surveyed to find out what's your spend on IT security specifically and what is it spent on.
mm.
91% of that IT spend was for security anyway, it was on protection elements. So they put the majority of their focus on protection only. Protection are things like your antivirus, your firewall, the things that help prevent getting in. Kind of like if you look at the house and cloud example I give, you have doors and you have windows, and you have locks on those doors and windows, right? So those are some examples, and maybe even a fence or a wall on the outside. That would be like your firewall. So there's things that we can kind of do direct correlation to on the cybersecurity side to the house that I like to point out. And anyway, getting back to it, you also asked minimum viable. I think you absolutely positively have to have not just an antivirus program. You have to have something that is more next generation, and um, and it's not so much the product as it is the team behind it. And this is a common mistake. You think, oh, just because I get this number one rated antivirus program, you're good. Sorry, if you don't have a good team behind that, it doesn't matter how good, because what if you leave the front door unlocked? They're going to walk right in, right? So,
Sure.
um, so you got to have, even though you have the tool there, if you don't have the right team behind it, remember to lock the door, or also put the little chain across and then push the deadbolt slide over and all that. If you're not doing each of those steps, then you're still vulnerable. So, what I mean by more advanced endpoint type of solution, if you have the type of antivirus that has to let the threat in and onto your computer, I think that you're already starting out at a disadvantage. It'd be kind of like
Mhm.
having door frames and window frames, but no doors or windows in there. And you're saying, okay, bad guy, come on in. Then we'll turn on the security to locate and do something about it. Or maybe if you have a dog, they eat them. Or if you here in Florida, you can take care of it yourself type thing. But do you really want to do that? Wouldn't you rather keep them on the other side of that door or window and maybe even on the other side of that wall? Of course you would. So we use platforms with teams that are going to help keep them on the other side of that wall first and foremost. And if they get over the wall, then we're not letting them pass that door and window because there's going to be locks in place and all that. So it's really important to have the correct type of solutions in place, and that solution is not just software; it's the team behind it. So we put a lot of emphasis on that team as well, and I'm partnered up with a security team that I think is phenomenal, and I have them looking also at email, my email defense side of things, because that's the number one vector that the criminals are coming in through is email. 77% of the ones that led to a breach or incident started as phishing emails. Just think of the number that actually were sent out. And there's lots of other crazy little things, stats that are just mind-boggling. Like Microsoft last year in January, I went to a conference and Microsoft got on stage and basically said that they were experiencing, and they log all this stuff and they have eyes on it all the time, 1 billion attacks per day. That's 1 billion with a B. And Amazon was reporting the same thing. In 2023, they had saw
Mm.
a drastic increase from 100 million to 700 million in a six or actually 4 month period. And then by the first of 2020, actually it was the first of 2025. I got my year off. It was 2024 for them. Sorry about that. But in all of 2024, it was building up to that 1 billion mark. And in January timeframe, they wrote another, blog piece that said that they had surpassed 1 billion attacks per day. So that's two companies and over 2 billion attacks per day. So a lot of people think that means that these guys are only going after the large enterprises like Microsoft and Amazon. But the crazy thing is even though the percentage came down on the number of attacks on consumers and small businesses, what actually happened is that number went up. It's just the percentages. When you have a billion per day going at, one company and another billion going at another company, that kind of skews the numbers a little bit. So it took away from the top line of the number of the percentage of attacks on small businesses and consumers. But that number actually, the number of attacks actually went up on small businesses and consumers. And oh, look at that. I got a thumbs up. I guess because of
You're
but
doing a great
but
job.
anyway, yeah, the percentage went down, but the number of attacks went up. In other words, because of AI attacks fueled a lot of these increases because AI doesn't sleep. They can have
Yeah,
it.
they can just set that thing and forget it.
So, in addition to the advanced endpoint defense with a SOC team behind it, you have to have monitoring because remember I was saying protection is where most of the money's going. Well, if you
Mhm.
don't have detection and response elements, then your security, how good is your security? If you're missing a piece of it. And I would always ask this when I get in front of people, which one of those, protection, detection, response, which one of those is most important? And people will raise, oh, protection. Oh, maybe a one or two might say detection or something like that. But it's like if you take away any piece of security, how good is your security? Doesn't that mean you have a hole there? So in other
Yeah,
words, your
sure.
security
It's like
is only as good as
you
your
can
weakest
build a
link.
wall, but if they can just climb the wall and get over it, there's
Yeah.
nothing to stop them from climbing it, then it's almost like not much of a point.
Right. So it's important to have all pieces of security in place. Otherwise, there's holes. And one of my vendors actually says this every now and then. He says 99% secure is 100% unsecure. So that's stuck with me, and I completely believe that because that's what the criminals are looking for. They're looking for that one little place they can slip in. So,
Sure.
other things you need to have in place, I believe, is you have to have some type of allow listing type of program. You know, you'll hear this sometimes called whitelisting. In other words, every single program is known by
Hmm.
this software system, and if anything new is introduced, it's going to challenge it and stop it from running. And we use allow listing programs. Other um, zero trust security is a buzzword, but zero trust it is kind of like what it sounds like. It's a trust but verify type of system where you don't let anything go through without knowing what it is. So we have zero trust network access components. We use something called Secure Access Service Edge, SASE, which is another zero trust component. And what that basically does is ensures that any connection to the internet is encrypted, and it's also going to be hidden, kind of like what some of the newer VPNs do. They kind of like hide your presence if you're in a uh, communal or not communal, what would you say, a community type of internet connection, like a coffee shop wireless access point. If you're connected to that, potentially you could be seen by everybody else there and potentially get, somebody could access your computer without your knowledge or permission, of course. Well, with SASE and certain types of VPNs, you can prevent that type of thing from happening too. So we usually have that in place. Email defense is absolutely essential. You have to have something that can not only stop spam, but you have to have something that's going to also um, stop the phishing emails because that's the majority of the attacks are phishing types of emails. And the other things that we have in place is it's called web content filtering, but it also is a another form of firewall. It's technically we call it a DNS or domain name services firewall that that helps prevent the user from getting to known bad or malicious websites, but it also has some AI elements to it that help um, prevent access to even news sites that just got turned into a malicious site. And those sites are all over the place, so it's important to keep that kind of thing in place. And we have some other minor components that are just as important, like a password manager, I think is absolutely essential. You got to have a backup. Um, Password manager, I'll go back to that just for a second, just because the majority of all the breaches that have been, exploited out there, they sell those credential sets online and on the dark web, or they just make the business's life miserable by letting the press know that, hey, we were able to hack that company and here's proof of it, type of thing. So those are, I think, the major ones. There's other pieces. That's one thing about security is that you have to have layers and layers and layers. There's defense in depth is how we refer to it. You got to have that layer upon layer.
Yeah, I don't know how people without a password manager are living right now.
Yeah.
I know a password. I think I might know two passwords. Like I know the PIN to get into my phone, and I know the password for my computer, and I know the password for my password manager. But outside that, I don't really know any passwords. And trying to keep the passwords in your memory is tough because there's so many different accounts and type of accounts that people are signing into and out of all day long using all their different tools.
Yeah.
And if you don't have some kind of technology to help you manage that situation, you're inevitably going to be using similar iterations of a single password that opens up a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah. Did you see that movie Enigma? It's the
Uh,
one where the guy was there was a team that was brought together to try to solve and crack the Nazi
ah,
code.
sure.
Yeah, it was really the first ever computer. This guy, um, kind of it almost was like an abacus, but
Was this the
electronic
turning?
version.
Is this the turning machine?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. The Turing machine, exactly. And that machine was able to finally work because they got the very first thing that was always started every single German message. It was
Sure.
Heil Hitler, right? And because of that, they knew each message started that way. They were able to then get through. The Turing machine was able to
Hmm.
crack the code before the end of the day, because that's what they kept encountering is that they could never get past that because and the Germans changed their codes every single day.
Yeah,
So
the not necessarily the algorithm, but the keys or whatever would
right.
rotate on a
So
regular basis.
think of that. If they were able to do that in the times of World War II and how slow that technology was, if you use a part of a word even that's the same in every single password,
Hmm.
how quickly are these brute force methods going to be able to get through that? Especially when they have entire
Well,
dictionaries of commonly used passwords
yes. So it's
and other
basically
things.
if you have any word in your password that is in the English or any other language, you're 50% cracked already.
Yeah, well, this is something that's actually published, and you can look this up if you haven't seen this before. But 49 out of 50 passwords can be cracked in 1 second or less.
Sure.
49 out of that's 98 out of 100 or 98% in less than 1 second.
Yeah,
So,
when you have the password manager, it just puts a bunch of gobbledygook in there,
right,
symbols, all kinds of different characters, and
correct.
and then
It's
each
just
one of your
randomly
accounts,
generated.
yes, and it's usually going to be a long string of characters of
Mhm.
random stuff, and then it's going to be unique from account to account. So a single breached account is not going to have an impact on
Right.
on on as much of an impact on your life as you would if you were using similar iterations of a single password
And so many
across all of
people
your
do,
accounts.
right? They use the
Oh,
same one.
I
And a lot of
guarantee
times they'll just put a one or an exclamation point at the
yes,
end or two. Oh, this is the second iteration of that password. And I think that's
yeah.
now that
But
doesn't work very well.
but just to wrap up this particular topic, when you started out talking about security and how to think about security, or drawing analogies between the cyber realm and the physical realm, it reminds me of a conversation that I had with a client a few years ago when we were negotiating our service agreement. And in our service agreement, it says that we're not going to guarantee that you won't get breached. And this particular client didn't like that statement. And
Hmm.
I can clearly see why. If I'm hiring you to secure my systems and I'm paying you a bunch of money every month and every year, why can't you guarantee that for me? And so in that moment, what I did was I drew a parallel between the cyber realm and the physical realm as well, where I said something to the effect of, well, you pay a security company to install all this security system on your office, but they are not going to guarantee that someone's not going to break into your building.
Right. Yeah, that's a great parallel because it's absolutely true. We can't, I mean, just think of the motivation. Like here's an example of a successful, you could call it a hack, even though it's not technically a hack. But Jeff Bezos, his um, his phone was hacked, right? Well, you know how that was completed or how that was accomplished? Somebody got hold of his phone, took out the existing SIM because it wasn't an eSIM, it was a physical SIM, and put a new SIM in there. They
Mm.
had access to his phone. Can you 100% guarantee that Jeff Bezos will never get hacked? Absolutely not. He's one of the richest guys in the world, right? It's
He's
like
got
if
a big
somebody was
target on
able
his
to,
back.
what's that?
He's got a big target on his
Yeah.
back.
But it's kind of like, the Wall Street Journal interviewed the Department of Defense and and the FBI, and they were asking him questions like, well, what's the average amount of time before somebody realizes that they've been breached? And it was over 6 months. And when do they find out about it? Usually over a year later. And
Yeah.
it's like you think of those types of numbers.
When it's too late to do anything about
Yeah,
it because
it's
they've been sitting there collecting information about you and your systems, doing their best to pry their
right.
way in a little more and more all the time, and then crafting the perfect attack to accomplish whatever it is they want to accomplish, which is typically some type of an extortion.
So that's where we're going to be different as well. We're going to have stuff that looks for those foothold type of locations that they try to hide in and any suspicious activity, and that's where the allow listing comes in handy and having the right types of security in place that will detect that type of stuff. So one of the differentiators by having an IT company that has a mature security mindset versus somebody that I've heard them called trunk slammers or just, the kid right out of high school that has no real expense or experience, they're not going to know how to provide you with that defense in depth or those layers of security that help limit risk. Because this is really what it comes down to, right? We can't guarantee that somebody will never get breached or have an incident. However, we can say that we're going to help limit their risk as much as possible because we're going to detect it much more quickly than if you didn't have anything at all on there, or if you had one of those, the 80% of antiviruses, you have to let, kind of like that scenario where I said you have door frames and window frames, but no doors or windows in place, let alone no locks. 80% of the antiviruses out there, you have to let the threat onto your system before it goes, oh, that shouldn't be there. That's a bad file. It's on my system. And then it does something about it. Wouldn't you rather keep it out altogether?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah, so
I have a feeling that we could probably go down this security rabbit hole for the next 5 hours, but I think for the sake of time here, I really would like to move on uh, to compliance.
okay.
And one of the things that is affecting people is the evolving litigation, the framework, and the regulation that is evolving here in the world. And one of those things is FTC safeguards, something that I know that you're very well versed in. And most owners don't realize they might fall under the FTC safeguards rule.
Right.
What are the simplest ways for a business to figure out if they're covered, and what does good compliance look like without turning into a paperwork nightmare?
Yeah, that's another one of those multi-part questions. So you're good at those, Chris. The FTC safeguards rule is from some, people hear that and they go, what the heck is that? Well, they know who the FTC is, but safeguards rule, what's that? Well, that originated from the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which was passed all the way back in 2003. And the problem was is that for over 20 years, they did absolutely no enforcement of that law. And even though the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was known as far back as 1999 when it was first introduced, and that's when the House and Congress started talking about it, and they finally voted on it and passed it in 2003. It wasn't until June 9th of 2023 that they actually started that enforcement phase. And back then it was like, well, you had to have more than 5,000 clients or records at least before it would be enforceable. So a lot of small businesses were thinking, oh, this doesn't apply to me. But then not even 6 months later, it was actually in October of 2023 of the same year that they made it into effect. They dropped that from 5,000 down to 500. So in other
Hmm.
words, pretty much any
That's a big
business,
difference.
yeah, huge difference, right? So where it gets confusing and why a lot of businesses don't think that it applies to them is really this. The FTC has a very loose description of what a a company that must comply is. They call them financial institutions. So, what's a financial institution according to the FTC? Well, it's anybody that really handles any type of customer or client data that is more than personally identifiable information, but there might be some pieces of information in there that is used by a loan company, for instance. So, in other words, if you're providing like your driver's license, your social security number, in addition to your name and address or name and phone number, you've got enough information there to where they say, okay, you must protect that. You must take reasonable measures to keep that secure. So that's what they intend with that. Now, if you think of businesses that are out there, who has that kind of access to that kind of information? A lot of businesses do because they're usually having people fill out a form or they're gathering this information by asking questions, things like their name, address, phone number. And if they're applying for credit with them, then they're typically doing some type of background check or they're doing something where they're, going to look into them a little bit by doing a credit check, whatever. But if they gather that information, then by law, not because I say so, I'm the IT guy that says you're supposed to by law, apply just like the HIPAA Act did. HIPAA required the healthcare industry to comply. Well, FTC safeguards rule is is similar to that HIPAA, where it does require nine specific things must be um, you got to provide proof of this stuff. You have to provide evidence of this stuff. So everybody that's in the or that's in a business that collects information that could be financially based must comply with this law. So they must have a person designated in writing that they're responsible for that organization and their basically compliance with this FTC safeguards rule. And this is all actually available. So if somebody wanted to look it up, they could look up the FTC safeguards security program. And I mean, I know that there's federal regulation websites that lay all this out. And I typically send a little two-page document to anybody that's curious about it because it has links right in it to these federal regulations so they can check for themselves. In addition to having that designated individual, they also must have an annual risk assessment and penetration test that goes along with that. Well, what's a penetration test? Well, that's where somebody
Wow.
from the outside
I,
is.
I, I didn't realize that was that involved.
Yeah. There's 9 points that must be complied with on this.
Sure.
They have to have certain controls in place, like they have to have encryption on any of the computers that has that data on it, and that includes if they send an email that has any of that information, it's supposed to be encrypted. So at rest and in motion, it's supposed to be. They
So
have
without getting uh, too far into the details
sure.
around this particular framework, how does the company keep track of this stuff?
Well, if they contact a company like ours, we help manage it for them. So that's one way they can do it. Because that first thing I mentioned, having a person designated in writing, it doesn't have to be employee of the business. It can be a third party, such as a company like ours. Now, I'll be honest, typically I
Anyone
want
that's willing to put their reputation on
right.
the line, right?
And typically we want the somebody with a stake in the business to have that.
Sure.
So I don't typically want to take that over. It's one of those things where I'd rather have them take the responsibility and all that, but it can be
So,
a
so
third
what
party.
we're talking about here, is this what's known as the qualified individual?
Yes, they must have
Okay.
a qualified individual.
So I have a
Qualified meaning.
question. I
Mhm.
have a question about that. So the safe, so this is about putting accountability on leadership, is what I'm gathering.
Yes, because there is a particular part of that even if it's given to somebody outside their organization,
Mhm.
the client retains responsibility even if they designate somebody outside their organization. So that business owner or that appointed person like a CEO or president would still ultimately be responsible. But it's also important for that third party if they're taking on that role that they make it very clear, hey, I'm helping with this. I am the one that's managing this for you. However, you're still responsible. And that's one thing. If they ask us to do that, we're going to make sure that they understand clearly that they are the one that's ultimately responsible. We're just managing it for them.
Sure. I would like to switch gears here.
Mhm.
Let's talk about AI for a second. I know that you personally use AI. You've shown me a lot of things about what you're doing with AI, and I've adopted some of those things. And in your operations at Just Right. So what's one AI workflow that instantly improves an owner's week?
I think one of the quickest return on investment you can get is to have AI go through your email for you.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is go through all of the messages and present you with a summary of the email that you are basically are in your inbox, and it highlights the ones that need action and because I mean that right there is the biggest time saver. And if you have one that'll even draft responses for you, that's even better. And the one I'm using does draft a response. I have to be honest, a lot of times I don't like what it drafts. I end up changing it, but at least I got a starter. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest ways you can get a immediate return on using it because it's going to be a time saver right away.
Cool. All right. So let's connect some dots here because we've been talking about security, we've touched on compliance, and now we're talking about AI.
Hmm.
So a lot of things going on here with small businesses. So what should small business owners uh regarding security and compliance think about when it comes to adopting AI?
Well, one of the things that I tell everybody when they ask me about AI is I tell them be sure you get the plan that you pay for because nothing's ever free. If you get an AI that's free, you have to read those terms and conditions carefully because you may be basically giving up everything to get that free product. So free is not free. It just means that you're giving up something that you're probably not aware of. So always get a subscription, and there's different AI that are better for certain types of things. So it's hard to recommend an AI to somebody unless I know exactly what they want to use it for. And there are some platforms out there that let you harness multiple different AI services. So yeah, there's usually an interview process that goes on. The one thing that is almost always a requirement so that you don't break compliance is to make sure that you separate company data from client data. And
Mm.
that's vitally important because if you have um, customer or client data getting cataloged, that means there's typically a privacy concern, and you may be giving up information that you're not authorized to give up under every single state has a Privacy Act. So that is very crucial that they know what they're doing as far as um, keeping that data separate. It's
Yeah,
perfectly fine to
I
have all
can think
company
of
data.
some potential security concerns around in that realm, or at least how separating the info or not separating the information could there could be some implications where you've got people in different roles in your organization uh, because you're commingling information, they could gain access to things that they might not need or you might not want them to have access to in their role.
Yeah. Um, and that's usually how a company that gets AI, and we consider it to be a shadow IT problem as well. So,
Can you explain what shadow IT is for the folks out there?
yeah, shadow IT is any programs that are being used in the business that are not business owned or business authorized applications. So like these free AI programs, those are a great example of what we would consider to be shadow IT, something that was installed. Maybe it's the personal AI for that particular person, and they decided to load it up one day at work. Even if it was on their break time, it's still potentially compromising that business and that computer because it's not really supposed to be on there. So it's basically any program or app that shouldn't be on a business system, and any app that is installed should be authorized by the business. So, check with your IT department. If you don't have an IT department, check with your manager or supervisor because they're gonna uh, probably have a better idea. And if they don't know, then you need to check with somebody that does know. And if you're just bringing your own personal programs into work, that's generally not good anyway. So,
Yeah, I can only imagine that folks are starting to leverage AI to a certain degree personally, and then they're trying to employ that same AI, whether it's free or on a personal subscription to help them with their job too.
yeah. Um, Sorry, I didn't catch your question in that, but
Oh, but so the question was regarding security and compliance when it comes. So if a company wants to adopt AI, what are the security and compliance implications there? And I think we did touch on that. We were talking about roles-based access, making sure that there's some kind
yeah,
of a solid segmented structure for at least separating client data from internal data. And then of course, when you start diving into internal data, there should be further segmentation for various different levels of management and different teams inside the organization as well.
yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah, and
Hopefully.
there are applications out there that can help manage that. I was at a conference just a couple weeks ago where I saw some of that, and I was considering adding that in as this becomes a bigger and bigger issue. But yeah, that is the number one thing is keeping client data separate from business data and making sure that none of the client data, unless it's authorized, I guess you could say if a client says, yeah, I would like for you to, use my data because you're studying something, but typically you want to keep client data out.
Yeah,
Uh,
we are seeing the term roles roles-based access control
right.
used everywhere. We see it, we started seeing it first in our CMMC clients where we're working through helping them become compliant with that framework. And
Hmm.
we're also seeing it in insurance questionnaires.
Yeah.
So, every year the insurance company, if you have cyber insurance, they're going to shoot a questionnaire down to you and try to find out a little bit more about your operations so they can measure the risk that's associated with the coverage.
Right. Yeah,
And roles-based access controls popping up everywhere.
we were talking about risk earlier, and cyber insurance is absolutely one of those critical types of insurance that I believe businesses should have because every business is under threat of attack every single day, and if you think you're not, when Microsoft and Amazon are both reporting over 1 billion attacks per day on
Mhm.
them, all it takes is one to get through. So even if your business is only getting one attack per day, if somebody clicks on a link they shouldn't, or if somebody goes to a web page that's been compromised. So risk is what it's all about and mitigating your risk. So cyber insurance is absolutely essential. And just like you were saying, cyber insurances now are almost like compliance. You have to show evidence. You have to, show that you have all these different things. And here's the other thing about that. If you document that you had something in place and then you file a claim at some point and they ask for that evidence and you can't produce it, guess what?
Oh yeah,
Claim,
they're going to
claim
send in
denied.
all their digital forensic guys
Right.
to look for any piece of information they can to not pay out the claim.
Right. And there's even been precedents set where a company was awarded a claim and the insurance company had a forensic team that was able to, through looking at the data, found that the customer lied about something, and that insurance company then went back at that company, sued them, and recovered pretty much all of their claim money. So that precedence has been set. They will do everything they can to keep their money, even though it's your money that paid for it. They don't like
Yeah,
paying the money you give them, out to you on a claim. So,
sure. Yeah, so this starts to remind me of a conversation that I had with Kevin Ishizu from Televi a couple
mhm.
months back. He actually spent a good amount of his career in the beginning actually building the cyber insurance industry because there was a time when there wasn't insurance when there weren't insurance products
Yeah.
for these types of coverages.
Yeah, very true. And yeah, I know Kevin also, and I use Televi. It's one of those great programs that helps find, where there are weaknesses so that we can advise our clients. So, and
Yep, I
that's
agree.
another piece I'd say is important. If somebody has compliance requirements, they need to have an IT company that can provide them with the tools they need to be able
Yeah.
to make sure they are.
Imagine trying to manage an environment without tools.
Right. Yeah. It's
How
near
how many
impossible. I
people
would
would you
say it
need to
is.
offer or hire? How many people would you need to hire?
Yeah, it would be crazy. So yeah,
Sure.
thankfully we have all these tools, at our disposal, and we can use them well, or we can not so well, I guess.
Well, John, we're approaching an hour here, and I feel like we touched on a lot of things today. And
Yeah, we did. That was
I think
great.
this is a really good conversation, and I do appreciate you being here with me talking.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Chris.